You ever notice how the safest places in your life are usually the ones hiding the most? I didn't understand that until one Sunday morning when my husband handed me a set of keys I'd never seen before and said, "If anything ever happens to me, open the box. Don't let anyone else touch it." My name is Dorothy Chambers. I'm 63 years old, and I live in a brick colonial house on Maple Ridge Drive in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you stay with me through this story, you'll understand how a set of keys and a safety deposit box turned my entire world inside out and revealed the kind of betrayal no mother should ever have to face. It was late September, the kind of morning where the light comes through golden and the air smells like pine and just a little bit of smoke from someone's fire pit down the street. My husband Raymond and I were sitting on the back porch, drinking coffee, watching the birds fight over the feeder the way they always did. He was 65, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man who filled a room just by standing in it. He'd built Chambers Logistics from a single delivery truck into a fleet of 200 vehicles and a warehouse network across 6 states. The company was worth somewhere around $22 million, and every penny of it had been earned with his hands, his sweat, and more sleepless nights than I could count. That morning he seemed different. Not sick exactly, but heavy. Like he was carrying something he couldn't set down. He kept stirring his coffee long after the sugar dissolved, staring at the trees like they owed him an answer. "Ray," I said, "you've been stirring that cup for 5 minutes." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Dot," he said quietly, "I need you to do something for me." "No questions." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not how this marriage works, and you know it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small brass key attached to a leather tag. "First National, Box 714. Everything you need is inside. If something happens to me, you go there first. Before the lawyers, before the family, before anyone." I stared at the key. The leather tag was worn, like he'd been carrying it for a while. "Raymond, what are you talking about? What's going to happen to you?" He leaned forward and took my hand. His fingers were warm, but his grip was tight. "Probably nothing. But I've been going through the books. Some things don't add up. And until I figure out where the money's going, I want to make sure you're protected." "Protected from what? From who?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me with those deep brown eyes, the same ones that had convinced me to marry him 41 years ago in a courthouse with nothing but a borrowed ring and a whole lot of faith. "Just promise me, Dot. Keep it safe." I slipped the key into my apron pocket and nodded. "I promise." He kissed my forehead and went inside to get ready for church. I sat there for a long time after he left, listening to the birds, feeling the weight of that little brass key like it was made of lead. Raymond had always been careful. After his bypass surgery 3 years ago, he'd become even more meticulous about everything. Insurance policies, wills, power of attorney, all updated and filed. But this felt different. This wasn't planning. This was warning. The rest of that day passed the way Sundays do. Church, lunch, a nap in his recliner while I read beside him. He snored softly, his reading glasses still perched on his nose. I pulled the blanket over his legs and stood there watching him breathe, wondering why I suddenly felt like I needed to memorize the rhythm of it. Monday morning, he left for the office early, kissed me twice, which wasn't like him. Once on the cheek, once on the forehead. The second one lingered. "Drive careful," I called after him. He waved from the car without turning around. I should have called him back. I should have asked him to stay. But you don't think like that on a Monday morning. You just assume there'll be a Tuesday. There wasn't. Not for him. At 6:47 that evening, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Mercy General." I answered with a steady voice that broke by the second sentence. "Mrs. Chambers, your husband has been brought in by ambulance." He collapsed at his office. "You need to come now. I don't remember driving. I remember rain. I remember the traffic light at Elm and 4th lasting forever. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I got to the emergency entrance, a nurse met me with a look I recognized immediately. The look that says everything they're about to tell you is something you already know but aren't ready to hear. "Mrs. Chambers," the doctor said, "your husband suffered a massive cardiac event. We performed every intervention available. I'm deeply sorry." The room tilted. The lights got too bright. I felt my knees buckle, and someone caught my arm. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at him through the glass. He looked peaceful, like he was napping in his recliner. But the stillness was wrong. Raymond was never still. He talked with his hands, paced when he was thinking, drummed his fingers on every surface. This silence didn't belong to him. A nurse touched my shoulder gently. "Ma'am, would you like to sit with him?" I nodded. I pulled a chair beside the bed and held his hand. It was already cooling. I whispered his name over and over, as if saying it enough times could reverse what had already been decided. I told him about the birds at the feeder that morning, about the coffee he'd stirred too long, about the key in my apron pocket. I told him I loved him, and then I told him goodbye. I don't know how much time passed before I heard the elevator doors open at the end of the hall. The sound of heels clicking fast on linoleum. Then a voice I knew. "Mom." I looked up. My daughter Karen stood at the doorway, her husband Victor close behind. For a split second, I felt relief. My child was here. I wouldn't have to carry this alone. But Karen didn't come to me. She stopped 3 feet away, her eyes darting past me toward the bed, then back. Her expression wasn't grief. It was calculation. "Mom," she said, her voice too, even for a woman who'd just lost her father. "We need to talk about Dad's business accounts. Victor has some concerns about the transition." I blinked. The words didn't register at first. I was still holding Raymond's hand. "What?" Victor stepped forward. He was tall, clean-shaved, wearing a charcoal suit that looked too expensive for a Monday evening hospital visit. He adjusted his cufflinks before speaking. "Mrs. Chambers, I don't want to be insensitive, but there are time-sensitive matters regarding the company's operating accounts. We should ensure nothing is disrupted during the probate process." I stared at him, then at Karen, then back at him. "My husband is lying right there," I said, my voice shaking. "His body is still warm. And you're talking about accounts?" Karen sighed like I was being difficult. "Mom, this is exactly what Dad would have wanted. He always said the business comes first." "No," I said firmly. "He always said family comes first. The business was how he took care of the family. There's a difference." Victor opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "Get out, both of you. Not now." Karen's jaw tightened. She looked at Victor, then back at me. "We'll talk tomorrow," she said flatly. And then she turned and walked away. No hug, no tears. No, "I'm sorry, Mom." Just heels clicking back down the hallway, fading into the hum of machines and the soft beeping of monitors that were no longer monitoring anything. I sat alone with Raymond until the nurses gently told me it was time. When I finally stood, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I drove home in silence, the windshield wipers beating a rhythm that sounded like a clock running out. The house was dark, the porch light had burned out, and I'd been meaning to ask Raymond to change it. I unlocked the door and stood in the foyer, listening to nothing. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loud enough to echo. The smell of his aftershave still hung faintly in the bathroom. His slippers sat by the bed, pointing toward the door like they were waiting for him. I sat on the edge of the mattress and cried until there was nothing left. Then I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the brass key. Box 714. The next morning, I went to First National before it officially opened. The branch manager, a woman named Clara who'd known us for years, let me in through the side door. She didn't ask questions. She just squeezed my hand and led me to the vault. Inside box 714, I found a manila envelope sealed with packing tape. Raymond's handwriting across the front read, "For Dot. If I'm gone, read everything. Don't trust what looks familiar." Inside were 4 things: a letter, a flash drive, a printed spreadsheet with highlighted rows, and a photocopy of a consulting agreement signed by someone named Gerald Pratt, a name I'd never heard. I opened the letter first. "Dot, if you're reading this, then I didn't get to finish what I started. For the last 8 months, I've been tracking unauthorized transfers from Chambers Logistics into shell companies. Someone inside the company has been siphoning funds, roughly $1.6 million so far, through fake consulting fees and inflated vendor contracts. I didn't want to believe it at first, but the trail leads back to Victor, and I think Karen knows. I don't have enough to go to the authorities yet, but everything I've found is on the flash drive. Take it to Franklin Moss, my personal attorney. He knows what to do. Don't let them rewrite the books, Dot. You've always been the steady one. I love you more than any number on a balance sheet. Ray. I read it 3 times. Each time the words hit differently. The first time, disbelief. The second, anger. The third, a cold, quiet understanding that settled in my chest like a stone. Raymond hadn't just been worried. He'd been building a case, and he'd been doing it alone because the people he should have trusted were the ones stealing from him. I called Franklin Moss within the hour. He was an older man, deliberate in his speech, the kind of lawyer who listens more than he talks. When I showed him the contents of the box, his expression hardened. He suspected this, Franklin said quietly, turning the flash drive over in his hand. He came to me 2 months ago, asked me to prepare contingency documents, power of attorney, amended trust provisions, everything redirected to you exclusively. I frowned. He changed the trust? Franklin nodded. All major assets, the company, the properties, the investment accounts, everything was restructured into your name, legally binding, fully executed. He wanted to make sure that if anything happened before the investigation was complete, the people responsible couldn't touch what he'd built. My throat tightened. He knew. He didn't know he was going to die, Franklin said carefully, but he knew the risk, and he chose to protect you first. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from an attorney I'd never heard of, a man named Royce Kendall, representing Karen and Victor. The letter requested an emergency hearing to challenge the trust amendments, claiming Raymond had been mentally compromised at the time of signing due to his cardiac history. Mentally compromised. The man who could recite shipping routes from memory, who balanced 7-figure accounts in his head, who beat me at chess every single Thursday for 41 years. They were calling him incompetent. I sat at the kitchen table and read that letter 4 times, each reading making my blood run a little colder. Then I called Franklin. Franklin filed a response within 24 hours. He attached Raymond's medical records, cognitive evaluations from his cardiologist, and notarized witness statements from the bank officers who processed the trust amendments. Everything was airtight. Raymond had made sure of that. But Karen and Victor weren't backing down. By the end of the week, they'd filed a motion to freeze the company's operating accounts, the same move Raymond had predicted in his letter. Victor claimed fiduciary concern. Karen signed the petition as family representative. Neither of them called me. Not once. The Wednesday after the funeral, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the Chambers Logistics headquarters on Industrial Boulevard. The building was Raymond's pride, a 4-story glass and steel structure with the company logo etched into the front doors. I used to joke that he loved that building more than me. He'd always laugh and say, "Only on Mondays." The receptionist, a young woman named Brianna, looked startled when I walked in. "Mrs. Chambers," she said, standing quickly, "I didn't expect you." "I know, sweetheart. I just need a few minutes in his office." She nodded, eyes glistening. Raymond's office was on the top floor, corner suite, wide windows overlooking the loading docks. His desk was immaculate. Pens lined up, files stacked neatly, a framed photo of us at our 40th anniversary sitting beside the lamp. I sat in his chair and let the silence settle. Then I opened the top drawer. Inside, everything looked normal. Invoices, contracts, a roll of antacids. But in the back, taped to the underside of the drawer, was a small notebook. I peeled it free carefully. The cover was plain black, the pages filled with Raymond's tight, precise handwriting. Dates, amounts, names. Every suspicious transaction he'd tracked, organized chronologically. One name appeared more than any other, Gerald Pratt. And beside each entry involving Pratt, a single notation, VK approved. Victor Kendall. I was about to close the notebook when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. I looked up to see Elroy Washington, the night security guard who'd worked at Chambers Logistics for over 20 years. Raymond used to bring him coffee every evening when he worked late. Elroy stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, eyes respectful. "Mrs. Chambers, I'm sorry about Mr. Raymond. He was the best man I ever worked for." "Thank you, Elroy." I paused. "Were you here the night he collapsed?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I was on my rounds when I heard the commotion. But before that, around 6 o'clock, Mr. Victor came by. He went straight up to Mr. Raymond's office. I could hear voices, raised voices. Arguing? Elroy hesitated. More than arguing, ma'am. Mr. Victor was shouting, something about shares and board votes and how Mr. Raymond was holding him back. Then it got quiet for a few minutes. And then Mr. Victor came down the stairs fast, didn't say a word, just walked right past me and out the door. My stomach turned. What time was that? Maybe 6:30. Mr. Raymond stayed upstairs. I thought about checking on him but figured he needed space. Then about 15 minutes later, I heard a thud. By the time I got up there, he was on the floor. I called 911 right away. I closed my eyes. 15 minutes. Between the argument and the collapse. 15 minutes. Elroy continued, voice low. There's something else, ma'am. About an hour before Mr. Victor arrived, your daughter came by. She brought a thermos. Said it was soup for her father because he'd been working late all week. Did she go up to his office? Yes, ma'am. Stayed about 10 minutes. Left the thermos on his desk. I saw him drinking from it later when I made my rounds. My hands trembled. I looked at the desk. The thermos wasn't there anymore. Elroy, I said carefully. Do you know what happened to that thermos? He shook his head. It was gone by the time the paramedics arrived. I don't know who took it. I thanked Elroy and sat alone in that office for a long time. The sun was setting, throwing orange light across the floor. I stared at Raymond's photo, at his smile, at the way his hand rested on my shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. Franklin moved fast. Within 48 hours, he'd subpoenaed the security footage from the building, the access logs, and the visitor records. The timestamps confirmed everything Elroy had described. Karen at 5:02 p.m., out at 5:14. Victor at 5:58 p.m., out at 6:31. Raymond's 911 call logged at 6:47. Franklin also hired a private forensic accountant to examine the flash drive. What she found was damning. Over 18 months, $6 million had been funneled from Chambers Logistics through 4 shell companies, all registered under Gerald Pratt's name. But the authorization codes on every transfer belonged to Victor's executive login. Karen's signature appeared on 3 of the approval forms, listed as secondary corporate officer, a title Raymond had given her out of trust. But the money was only half the story. Franklin's next move changed everything. He requested that the county medical examiner conduct a secondary toxicology panel on Raymond's blood work, one more comprehensive than the standard cardiac workup. The results came back on a Thursday morning. Franklin called me at 7. His voice was the steadiest I'd ever heard it, and that terrified me. Dorothy, he said. They found something. The tox panel showed elevated levels of a compound consistent with digoxin, but at a concentration far exceeding his prescribed dosage. Combined with his existing heart medication, the interaction would have been enough to trigger fatal arrhythmia. I gripped the phone. Someone poisoned him. Franklin paused. The medical examiner has reclassified the death as suspicious. Detectives are being assigned today. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stared at the wall. The wallpaper was the same pattern Raymond and I had picked out together 15 years ago. Yellow flowers on a cream background. He'd said it reminded him of his grandmother's house. I thought about Karen, my daughter, the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, the teenager who cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak, the woman who'd brought a thermos of soup to her father's office the night he died, and I felt something inside me break that wasn't grief. It was the last thread of denial. Detective Anita Reeves showed up at my door Friday morning. She was sharp, mid-40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice. She sat at my kitchen table and listened as I laid out everything. The key, the letter, the notebook, the security footage, the thermos that disappeared. She took notes without interrupting, only pausing once to look up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Chambers," she said, "you've done more investigation than most people in your position would." "I didn't have a choice," I said. "He asked me to keep it safe." She nodded. "We'll take it from here. But I need you to understand, once we move on this, there's no going back." I looked at her. "I know. The investigation accelerated faster than I expected." Within a week, detectives traced the shell companies to a P.O. box registered in Victor's name. Gerald Pratt turned out to be a college roommate of Victor's who'd been paid $80,000 to act as a front. When detectives brought Pratt in for questioning, he folded within an hour. He gave them everything: bank records, emails, even text messages between him and Victor discussing how to move the money without triggering audits. But it was the thermos that broke the case open. Security footage showed Karen carrying it into the building at 5:02 p.m. Footage from the parking garage showed her placing something in the trunk of her car at 5:16, 2 minutes after leaving. When detectives obtained a warrant for the vehicle, they found the thermos in a gym bag in the back seat. It had been rinsed but not thoroughly enough. Lab analysis detected traces of a concentrated cardiac glycoside, plant-derived, consistent with foxglove extract, the same compound that had shown up in Raymond's blood. Karen was arrested at her home on a Tuesday afternoon. Victor was picked up at his office an hour later. I wasn't there for either arrest. I was sitting in Raymond's chair on the back porch, drinking coffee, watching the birds. Detective Reeves called me that evening. "We have them both," she said. "Karen's not talking, but Victor is. He says Karen obtained the extract from an online herbal supplier. He claims he didn't know what she planned to do with it." I closed my eyes. "And you believe him?" Long pause. "His fingerprints were on the purchase receipt, so no." I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't need to. The truth had already said everything I needed to hear. The hearing happened 3 weeks later. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, wearing the blue dress Raymond always said made my eyes look like the ocean. Franklin sat beside me, files organized, expression composed. Across the aisle, Karen sat in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, her face pale. Victor sat 2 rows behind her, his expensive suit replaced by county-issued clothing. Neither of them looked at me. The prosecutor laid it out methodically: the embezzlement, the shell companies, the falsified invoices, the thermos, the toxicology report, the security footage. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer on wood. Karen's attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming Victor had manipulated her. Victor's attorney tried to shift blame entirely onto Karen. They turned on each other before the judge even asked for closing arguments. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood slowly. The courtroom went quiet. I looked at my daughter. She finally met my eyes, and for 1 second, just one, I saw the little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street. Then it was gone. "Your Honor," I said. "My husband built everything we had with honesty. He worked 60-hour weeks for 40 years. He treated every employee like family. He trusted his daughter with a title and a role in the company because he believed in her. And she used that trust to steal from him and then to take his life." I paused. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because Raymond asked me to keep it safe. That's all I've done." I sat down. The courtroom stayed silent for a long time. Karen received 22 years, 12 for manslaughter, 10 for fraud and conspiracy. Victor received 18 years for embezzlement, conspiracy, and accessory to manslaughter. Gerald Pratt received 5 years for money laundering and cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge called it one of the most calculated acts of family betrayal he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. I didn't stay for the sentencing. I walked out of the courthouse into the November sun and drove straight home. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I'd never experienced. Not empty, quiet, but the kind that comes after a storm finally passes and you can hear the world again. Franklin helped me restore order to the company. Every stolen dollar was traced and recovered. Every employee who'd stayed loyal through the chaos received back pay and a personal letter from me. I promoted Elroy to head of building security with a raise Raymond would have approved of. I hired a new CFO, a woman named Patricia, who'd been Raymond's protégé 20 years ago. She cried when I called her. She said she'd been waiting for someone to make it right. One evening in December, I sat at the dining room table, the same table where Raymond and I had shared 10,000 meals, argued about politics, helped Karen with homework, celebrated anniversaries, and planned a future we thought we'd share. His chair was empty across from me. The wood was scratched from years of use, and if I looked closely, I could see the faint ring stain from his coffee mug in the exact spot where he always set it, a little too close to the edge. No matter how many times I told him to use a coaster, I poured 2 glasses of wine, one for me, one for the empty chair. The grandfather clock ticked steady in the hallway. Outside, the first frost had settled on the lawn, making everything shimmer under the porch light, the one I'd finally changed myself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key, box 714. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the weight of everything it had unlocked, not just a safety deposit box, but the truth about the people I'd trusted most. I set it on the table between the 2 glasses. "You were right, Ray," I whispered. "Some things don't add up." But I figured it out. The clock struck 8. The house stayed still, and for the first time since that Sunday morning on the porch, I felt something that wasn't grief, wasn't anger, wasn't even relief. It was steadiness, the kind he always said I had, the kind he'd been counting on all along. I picked up my glass, raised it toward his chair, and smiled. "Safe," I said softly, "just like you asked." The wine caught the light like amber. Outside, the night was cold and clear, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, low and long, the way they do in Charlotte when the world is quiet enough to listen. I sat there until the candle burned down to nothing, and when I finally stood, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt honest, and honest, I decided, was enough.